welcome Amijoma Onyato tonight. Presidency response to former President Obasanjo's statement described it as a distraction for the Buhari administration as it reels out achievements for the government. APC faults former President Obasanjo on Coalition for Nigeria proposal as Ekiti State Governor says call for President Buhari to jettison 2019 contest is in order. Former Secretary to the Government of the Federation, Babachir Lawal, in EFCC custody over alleged corruption. And the UK charity Save the Children halts its programs in Afghanistan after an attack on its offices.
On Business News tonight, Nigeria's Vice President Professor Yemi Osinbajo asks international investors at the World Economic Forum to consider fairer trade policies as antidote to migration.
On sports news, former USA gymnastics and Michigan State doctor Larry Nassar has been sentenced to 40 to 175 years in prison for sexually assaulting athletes under his care.
And from Abuja, implementation of the anti-open grazing law takes effect in Taraba State as groups in Benue threaten alignment with other regions if the attacks by herdsmen on the communities continue.
Tonight with the reaction of the federal government to a statement by former President Olusegun Obasanjo asking President Muhammadu Buhari not to seek re-election in 2019 because of his administration's poor performance. The Minister of Information, Mr. Lai Mohammed, who briefed the media on the government side of the issue, pointed out that the former president had probably been too busy to keep track of the administration's achievements. The Information Minister also acknowledged that Chief Obasanjo's statement was probably not ill-intentioned and his admonition has been received in good faith.
And he has proved that time and again. We appreciate what he said concerning the administration's performance in 2 out of the 3 key issues that formed the plank of its campaign, which are fighting corruption and tackling insurgency. Specifically, former President Buhari must be given credit for his achievement so far in these 2 areas. We thank him for this. Apparently, the former president believes that the administration does not deserve a pass mark in the area of the economy, which is the third of our 3-pronged campaign promises. We have no doubt that in the face of massive challenges in this area, this administration has availed itself very creditably. Today, most of the indices by which an economy is measured are looking up. Permit me to say, however, that Nigeria would not have exited recession through a mere order, or if this administration had not made use of good Nigerians who could help. On the herdsmen-farmers clashes, this administration is determined to end the crisis resulting from this once and for all, not minding the fact that the clashes predated us. I will urge Nigerians to have faith in the administration's ability to resolve the crisis and to watch out for concrete measures in this regard. On whether or not President Buhari should run for another term, it is true that many Nigerians have been calling on the president to run again, while others are opposed to his return. However, we believe this issue is a distraction for the president at this time. This is because the president spends every waking hour tackling the enormous challenges facing the nation, most of which were bequeathed to this administration by successive past administrations.
Minister of Information, Mr. Lai Mohammed. And for the ruling All Progressives Congress, Chief Obasanjo's statement directed at the president is an unfair criticism of the country's political system. The APC, in a statement signed by its publicity secretary, Bwala Abdullahi, acknowledges that the issues raised by the former president may have been done in good faith. But it says, quote, "We acknowledge our challenges as a new political party, even as we believe that APC remains the best option at this time for all Nigerians who are genuinely committed to the progress and development of the country," end of quote. The ruling party also points out that there are about 72 other registered political parties in the country, and Nigerians reserve the right to support any of them. That's an apparent reference to Chief Obasanjo's call in his article for the formation of a new movement called Coalition for Nigeria. According to the APC, the former president should not give the impression that none of the parties is good enough for Nigerians and a new movement is the only solution. Meanwhile, the reaction of the Ekiti State Governor Ayodele Fayose to Chief Obasanjo's statement to President Buhari is to ask the former president to stay out of politics. In an interview with newsmen in Ado-Ekiti, Governor Fayose accuses the former president of playing an unassigned role of installing and dethroning governments. He notes that Chief Obasanjo, who was instrumental to garnering international support for Buhari's presidential aspiration in 2015. Governor Fayose, however, aligns himself with the content and counsel in the statement, insisting that Nigerians know what to do without being prompted by any open letter.
The contents of the letter are okay and represents the views and opinions of Nigerians. You will agree with me that former President Obasanjo himself should also heed his own advice to Buhari by also quitting the public political arena now. Nevertheless, President Buhari should heed ex-President Obasanjo's advice and go home to rest. We will never be led by cabals anymore. President Obasanjo told us Yaradua was Hill and Ati. Again, he told us Jonathan was the best. In 2015, he said Buhari has what it takes to lead us. The war story is here to believe again.
Now, one of the main issues raised by former President Olusegun Obasanjo in his special press statement was his suggestion of a third force to be introduced into the nation's political space. The former president had described the two leading political parties in the country, the APC and the PDP, as unworthy vehicles for political development in 2019. The former president said even though he was retired from partisan politics, he would join such a movement to ensure the continued growth of the nation's democracy. And now, what is this third force about? And has it been tried before? What chances does it have in a field where there are already 68 registered political parties? Joining us on the news at 10 to give perspective on all this is a legal practitioner and a political analyst, Mr. Daniel Bwala. He joins me from Abuja. Thanks a lot for joining us on the news at 10.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Let's just back up a little bit and look at what Chief Obasanjo has said about the two main political parties, that's the PDP and the APC. He said they are wobbling, and so he's calling for this coalition for Nigeria. How viable is this call for a third force at this time?
Well, thank you for having me. The idea behind the call for a coalition needs to be understood, because there are lots of people who believe that the need for a coalition is providing alternative for some of the bold players in either of the political parties should there be problem consequently. Because so far, individuals have not indicated interest to run under the quote-unquote the coalition force. But I choose to look at it from the perspective that the third force is a reference to a people who may not have inclination or may not be bound by certain tenets of political parties, but they come up with leadership ideas, and irrespective of the party from where they come from, they can be supported to take political posts. And in the history of the country, there has never been a time when people have indicated interest to participate actively in political process in this country like this moment.
Well, yeah, one of the big questions, are there any of such people like that who have no political inclinations at all? Because some of people are already saying, where will the members of this third force come from if they're not going to be political elements from the parties that we have already? Is there anyone out there who has zero political affiliation and just comes to forge a group and then seizes power? Do you think that's possible?
That is the problem, because the National Assembly, unfortunately, don't look like they are going to pass the not too young to run and the independent candidacy. Had it been we have a law like that, then it is very possible for us to actualize this third force agenda. But the problem is not even with the third force, to be honest. The problem is with governance in this country. And I prefer to put reference and put to spotlight some of the things that the president, the former president talked about, the current president in his epistle. And one which is very fundamental is that first point, which he talked about the nepotism associated with this government. Now, without prejudice to the success of this administration in terms of economy, in terms of security, and even in the anti-corruption fight, but the recent happenings in the government, like insecurity, the inability of the government to act promptly on issues, and of course, the last straw that broke the camel's back was the appointment of the Director General of NIA, which ran contrary to the recommendation set up by the same panel that the president set up, which recommended that from the pool of existing and serving directors, the most senior should be the one to take over. He ignored the recommendation and went ahead and appointed somebody who happens to come from the same town with him, amidst a lot of controversy and complications surrounding the person. That has spurred a lot of concern from the heart of many people in the country, and I believe must have been the juggler behind the letter of President Obasanjo.
Yes, indeed, those are some of the issues that are being talked about, nationally, and those are some of the issues that former President Obasanjo raised as well. But if you then look at the response from Alhaji Lai Mohammed, talking about all this being some sort of a distraction, even though he did acknowledge that, okay, it was received in good faith, would you say that what has been said so far is a distraction for the current government?
Not at all. I don't believe it's a distraction. As a matter of fact, what President Obasanjo said is not new. It is the same sentiment that is echoed by people on the street, in the market square, in shopping malls, in family homes. It's the same problem that we're confronted with every day. Take, for example, the issue of the NIA. What is the big deal about implementing a recommendation by a panel you establish? And in this administration, we have seen over and over where a committee or a panel will be set up each time there is a problem. But after they come out with recommendation, it will not be implemented. In this case, the recommendation is just very obvious. And this is where you show leadership, where you can reverse certain decision that is considered by the nation as being nepotic, and then be the leader like you are. In the case of Benue, for example, he did not travel there. It created a lot of problems before he invited the people over there. This president, in my opinion, is the president that stands in a better position to pilot the affairs of this country. Unfortunately, his inability to manage his managers is creating a management problem for him.
Okay, finally, now, let me just bring you back to my original question about this third force in terms of how it should be constituted and what the whole idea is. Where will the source of funds from this third force come from? Already there's such an issue about campaign funding, etc., where it comes from, questionable characters. Are you thinking about that as well, if we're going to have this structure on ground, finally now?
I actually don't. I believe in the third force agenda, but I don't believe the movement and in the way it is being conveyed is likely going to happen. You made mention of a very important point. Where is the funding going to come? Probably disgruntled politicians who could not get their interests satisfied in a party might come behind to say they are going to sponsor or support somebody. And our electoral laws has not limited the extent to which political party or politicians will raise funds for the purposes of the election. So, but I think that it is a good engagement. Let's have the conversation in the hope that the National Assembly will do something that will make it easy for us to have this realization. But as it stands now, to be honest with you, 2019 President Buhari is winning.
Oh, really well. That remains to be seen. Thank you so very much, legal practitioner and political analyst, Mr. Daniel Bwala, for joining us on the news at 10 tonight. And in part two, after the break, police arrest leader of the gang that kidnapped 2 Americans and 2 Canadians in Kaduna last week. That's in a moment. Please stay with us.